hello, here is Michael from the New Left, and today we'll be talking with Nikki Koval about the situation in Austria and the Austrian left and the perception of, well, Austrians and how they see Slovakia and vice versa. So hello, Nikki.
Hi, hello.
Right there. And here is Tim with us as well from the New Left.
Hi.
Hi. So well, let's start. So the first question is, please introduce yourself, Nikki. Tell us something about you, how you end up in the left kind of sphere. Why? Was it family? Was it learning and reading? How did you end up with SPO? Because you are a SPO politician in Austria.
Yeah, I'm not really a politician. I'm a teacher at a business school for economics, and I always did political activism in the European, in the Austrian Social Democratic Party in my spare time. So it's not really, it's not really a professional political work. Yeah, and basically, I grew up in a very conservative environment in the countryside, especially my high school was, yeah, pretty old-fashioned, also mentally, and in the same time, my parents were quite liberal, and out of this contrast, I identified with left ideas due to horrible conservative teachers in the 90s in the Austrian countryside. Yeah, that's more or less the story. So think of a region where if you have long hair, it's still revolutionary. Okay, that's that's the baseline there. Yeah.
How was your puberty? Were you fighting back, and have you been a bad student and and drinking and partying and just pissing everyone off, or what was going on?
Yeah, first of all, I was pissing everyone off, but then I went a more constructive way, and I was the school representative of my school, and then I was the school representative of Lower Austria, which is unusual because it's difficult for a left wing to get all the other school representatives vote for you, and yeah, and this was my way in the social democratic sphere with the school student representative system in Austria.
Okay, and how did it follow from there to university? As far as I know, you are economy major, but what exactly did you study, and what was your path? How did you end up here where you are?
Yeah, so I first wanted to study politics and history, and then I recognized I cannot understand the world when I ignore economics. Especially the world 25 years ago, where globalization was the most important phenomena of our time. And when let's say a period without history, end of history period. So ideology, history, all this seemed old-fashioned, and I thought I need to understand the economy to be able to make substantial political statements. And so I went this way to improve my my political brain and thinking, and that was the reason why I stopped studying politics and I started with economics, which was a good decision. But it's also funny that now, 25 years later, history is back, and it's interesting that the economic sphere is again losing importance compared to when I was a student, and the political sphere is gaining importance in history. When we think about Vladimir Putin, for example, and historical concepts are are kind of coming back in the world, even in a grotesque way, but they are. So yeah, this was the reason why I chose economics. I was supported by the IMK. This is the Macroeconomic Policy Institute. It is the macroeconomic institute within the foundation of the German Trade Union Federation. So they basically financed my my PhD studies in economics, and yeah, between my diploma and my PhD, I went for my civil service to South America and was working for 1 year in a street children institution in Buenos Aires.
Now that's something I wanted to discuss with you. So how was it in Buenos Aires? I was pretty impressed when I've seen it that, you know, you can be somewhere on the beach and enjoying life, and instead of that you go into the dirt. And, you know, how was it?
It was in 2009, so it was still the Kirchner period, but Christina Kirchner's period, and yeah, the situation was comparatively stable, and I learned a lot, obviously, about the whole South American left and the perception of the world. But working in the institution was a little bit frustrating because you know, the children, they live in the street, and they only, our institution was only for clothes, for lunch, for breakfast, and for washing. And so afterwards at 3 o'clock, they go back to the street where they live, and finally you can change a lot. Yeah, you may improve their 4 hours that they spend in your facility, but you cannot make a substantial difference, and that was a little bit frustrating.
I have no clue how big is Buenos Aires, how many children are aware. 2009 is, hopefully the situation improved. How many children are we talking about? How big is it? What is it? Hundreds of kids, thousands of kids, tens of thousands? I have no idea.
Look, Buenos Aires is, so it's similar to Paris. So La Capital, Buenos Aires, the administrative borders of the city, that's 3 million people. But the region, so the agglomeration, is 10 more million. Yeah, so it's about, it's 13 million people. And the majority,
almost Austria and Slovakia put together, man. Okay.
yeah, it's unbelievable, huh? And the majority of the people are not extremely poor. So that's a difference to, I don't know if you've been to Lima maybe, or other South
Never
American.
been to South America. That's why I'm asking. And you talk about and we are greenhorns. You enlighten us, Nico. Tell us something about it.
All right. So you know, in Brazil and in Peru and in other parts of Latin America, you have really big favelas. That's a Brazilian expression. In Argentina, it would be villas. Huh? So very poor areas, and they are
corrugated houses, temporary houses put together by local people. You know, like they build themselves, like lean-tos. You know, like that.
Exactly, something like this. Huh?
Which there's a video online now where there's a huge one in California, no less. So the huge homelessness now in California. There's a video of it with a soundtrack over it to California, you know, and it's shocking. It's shocking to see it in a first world country, those types of places. You know. So,
yeah, I
sorry,
think,
just an aside there.
Yeah, I think many people are shocked when they when they take a Greyhound from one city to the other in the US and see what they would find between the beautiful
these
cities.
massive homeless towns.
Yeah, so I think Atlanta. People told me they went from the Atlanta airport to Atlanta City, and they thought that's a third world country or something. So anyway, in Buenos Aires, it's not a mass phenomenon. So it's maybe. I mean, it's getting worse maybe now. But in this time, it was less than 5% of the city population living in villas. Okay, so villas. Let's take
5% of those 13 millions, or 5% of those 3 millions.
I think of the 3 millions. Huh?
Okay. Because it's a different volume of people. And okay.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So behind the train station, for example, there's one villa with maybe 10,000 inhabitants. Huh? So this is so there are areas like this, but it's not the majority. It's not the majority of the cities. It's not. The typical picture of Buenos Aires is not total poverty. Huh? This is important to understand. And so the children were children from usually coming from these villas or from very poor areas like La Boca, the famous La Boca area where the club, the football club. Okay, so that's the most known Argentinian football club is in La Boca, and Maradona is coming from La Boca and so on. So the funny thing about these 3 children is many of them are blonde and have blue eyes. So this is special for Argentina. But
so they are not ethnic. They are white. That's what you are saying. I thought that those children are kind of like Indian, children.
No. Okay, that's also important. Argentina is like the US. They killed everybody. Okay. In South America, I mean, I don't know how much we want to talk about South America, but in the South American colonial history, the Andes, so the mountains, they were heavy populated, high civilized, and there many ethnic Indians survived, so that they still have a majority in Bolivia and big part of the population in Peru and so on. Also in the north of Argentina, where the mountains start, you have still large numbers of ethnic Indians. But the Argentinian mainland, which is very similar to the North American mainland, like plains, with not dense, where you had a very low density of population before the colonization. There, they finally they killed everybody else, and it was totally European populated. So when I was in 2009, I don't know what's going on in 2025, but when I was there in 2009, it was more white than every Western European city.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, then I stand corrected. I thought that those were Indian children and not. Then it's even more sad. And then you can't blame racism. Then it's really just capitalism, baby.
There is racism, and they have immigration from Peru and from Bolivia, and they call them negros. Yeah? So there is racism, and I guess there are more rich people with blonde hair than street children. But nevertheless, there are street children with blue eyes. Yeah.
How influential was this experience for you? Was it like that was the paradigm change where you kind of got radicalized, or you already knew what's going on in the world, or
No,
you know,
no.
what happened with your mind when you've seen
No,
all
I
this?
was no, I was I turned into a social democrat when I was 22, I think, or maybe 23, and it never changed again. So yeah, it didn't change a lot in my my worldviews. It was more or less what I anticipated. You know?
So just confirmed the opinions you had because you have seen firsthand what's going on when you are unlucky, no? Something like that.
Yes, you can say it like that.
Okay.
Put it like that.
Okay. Well, then let's switch to Europe and to, unless Tim has any question about South American
carry on.
experience.
Yeah,
Huh?
I want to.
Yeah.
At some point, I want to discuss some of your articles that you've put on your page, in particular protectionism.
No, well, we can go back to Europe and talk about, well, so you made your studies, you made your PhD, and you are in and out from SPO as a kind of, how would you describe yourself? I thought that you are a SPO politician. So, well, you know, tell us in your words what you are really for SPO, because I remember you from that big SPO kind of like Congress or whatever it was last summer. I don't remember exactly. That's first time I've seen you, and I like what you were saying back then. And I took you for a SPO politician, young and, you know, climbing. So
no, I'm an activist within the SPO, which is rare, especially my age. So usually you have young activists, and
so you are not even an SPO member?
Oh, I am. Yes,
okay.
Of course. No, I also have a function. You know, I'm like, you know, in my district here in Vienna, in the 9th district, I'm like the vice president of the district party. So I have a small function, and I'm an activist, but I'm not. My professional life is not happening in politics. So, and I'm proud because I could change some things in Austria without even being professionally in politics. So from this activist attitude, and it 2 or 3 times it really made a difference. So I like this way of intervening, but not being part of the power system. No?
So kind of independent, yeah, in and out when you feel like it, something like that.
Exactly, more or less, yeah. When there's something that seems really important to me, I intervene. So, for example, 2 years ago, there were 2 candidates for the party presidency. One of them was very apolitical, post neoliberal candidate. She was ideologically weak, and
who was it? I thought it was Doskočilo.
It was Pamela Rendi-Wagner. No?
Ah, okay.
She was one candidate, and the other candidate was like a very right-wing version of social democracy, like a little bit like Denmark, like Mette Frederiksen. I think even more radical. And from my point of view, much too conservative for being a social democratic party leader. And I didn't like both of the candidates, so I announced myself as candidate, even though there were only, the party had planned only, you know, an election between two candidates. And after I announced my race, they had to expand the number of candidates and said, okay, whoever wants to be a candidate can be a candidate. And so 3 days later, Andreas Babler from the party left announced his candidacy for the presidency of the Austrian Social Democracy. And so I resigned, and he won.
And was it just happenstance that Babler got involved, or you were, you know, aligned and you knew that he will step in, or how did it happen?
I didn't know it. No.
Okay.
But
so happy coincidence then, yeah.
You know, let's say I opened the door so that the party, you know, enlarged the number of candidates, and he used this opportunity, and so we kind of cooperated without.
As far as I know, Babler is kind of bottom-up candidate. That he wasn't very liked by the establishment of SPO,
exactly.
And the membership base kind of brought him up. And
exactly.
The question
like Jeremy
is,
Corbyn,
yeah, something like that. No? The question is, how rare is it in SPO that head of the party kind of is liked by membership base but not establishment? Another way around. You know, that was the discussion we wanted to have. You know, how politics is done in Austria and what are the differences? Because here in Slovakia, I can tell you that there is no membership base whatsoever in most of the parties. Most of the political parties in Slovakia, they have like 100 members. So, you know, let's as bottom up goes, you know, that's just not the way. So how is it in Austria? Because it's long established, 100+ years, SPO, 140,000 members as far as I know. How strong is the internal democracy there? Is it rare that the candidate
it was the first referendum in history.
Okay, well, there we go.
So we are very...
Why so late? Why took it 100 years to kind of bring up someone from the bottom?
Compared to other Western European countries, we are very late with democratization of the party. And this is because our political establishment is very, very strong. We, you know, they have... we have 140,000 members, and in many political levels, district level, community level, the province level, the social democracy plays an important role. So there is a lot of establishment, all in all, trade unions. So therefore, they always fear to open the party. There was always a fear of the...
When you did, I don't know the story behind it, but when the party was democratized, and you did encourage participation and voting for a left wing, did you see a corresponding rise in membership?
Yes, more than 10,000.
Exactly. So the similar thing happened when Corbyn got elected. He was put on the ballot paper with no expectation of winning whatsoever. He had no support from the official bureaucrats of the trade unions or the big groups or the MPs, barely any in Parliament. And yet they saw a surge in membership that took them to the largest group in Europe of 600,000 members. And of course, once he got kicked out with this scurrilous nonsense of him being anti-Semitic or whatever, and they persecuted him for this in all the papers and everything, once they kicked him out, there's then a purge of the exact same members that joined. So now it's declined dramatically and they've got next to no money left. but they don't care because they got full control of the Labour Party again. So this democratization had exactly the same effect of increasing young people's participation in politics. And the opposite is true, is that once they democratized and kicked him out, everybody left again, or they got kicked out forcefully for not being left-wing enough. So it's quite a similar story, I think, to what you're saying occurred.
Yes. So,
but Andreas Babler is vice chairman, as vice chancellor. That's how it's called, no? So there is still hope that he will not be kicked out. We will see. No, what is the mood there, Nikki? You know, how is Andreas holding up against the established political spheres, and you know what's going on?
He could just be co-opted. That's the other way.
Yeah, well,
he managed to install quite left-wing treasury. How do you call it in the UK? The finance minister.
Finance minister, no treasury. Oh, people understand.
Minister, finance minister,
Secretary of Treasury or something like
that. Yeah.
So we have a pretty left-wing finance minister now, which is a very powerful position, obviously, and this is thanks to Andreas Babler. So he is making a difference. He couldn't change a lot in the elections, so that's a little bit sad. The total left in Austria saw their worst election result since the war.
Wow.
So we couldn't we couldn't really, let's say they have lost a lot of trust in the past. Huh? You can imagine, like in most social democratic parties, they've had a very technocratic way of seeing the world, and bureaucrats without a lot of charisma were dominating the party establishment in the last 30 years. But nevertheless, we were hoping to make a bigger difference, and we didn't really. You know, we did well in the cities, we did well in the suburbs, we did well in the areas where more educated and more wealthy people live. That's crazy, but it's how it's going. Like in most countries. Rich areas start to vote left, and poor areas start to vote right, and this is, and we couldn't stop this crazy trend.
That's the question, whether it's really crazy, because I would say it goes hand in hand with the disruption of unionization in most Western or most countries, let's say. And when the unions are weak, then the populists get radicalized into the that maybe I'm simplifying and maybe it's bullshit, but that's how I see it, that it goes hand in hand with unionization. Unionization in Austria isn't exactly breathtaking with 30%. So 70% of workers, as far as I know, are not unionized. Ergo, there is the education is lacking in these political spheres, not to mention that the disruption that is coming on from social media, and the right-wingers are pretty strong. That's how Corbyn got kicked out, with media. So they just poison people's minds with bullshit, and then it happens. That's my read. So tell me otherwise, Nikki.
I don't know. It may be an explanation for countries like Austria, but trade unions played an important role 50 years ago, and now they are still comparatively strong. But
they are much weaker than they used to be, I guess. No, that's how.
Of course. So it may be one explanation, but I mean, the world is complex. So maybe
No, I'm not saying
maybe
it's the only one. It's just that's how. Maybe I'm just, you know, I'm a trade unionist. Tim is as well, so we can. That's why we are doing it, because we are believing that it brings in some change.
But then my next question would be, what is the reason why unions are losing importance? And then we're talking about society phenomena, which are bigger, yeah, than or economic developments that are more global or more general. We can talk about individualization, we can talk about globalization, we may talk about
all of the above. That's what is happening. People are just not willing to come together and fight collectively for whatever. Yeah,
so
they are
collectivism
so brainwashed by media that you know.
The only collectivism that is the only collectivism that works this time is, or in our times, is nativism. Or nationalism, and that's that's bad, but that's the situation we face, and I think the biggest question for the left in the last 30 years is how to get back solidarity, and this is what we are not really able to manage to achieve.
And I believe that it's the workplace. In the end, in the workplace, the money distribution and wealth distribution and everything gets decided. Now, if you are paid shitty, you will be pissed off. That's just totally understandable. And then you will be looking for someone to blame. And when you can't blame your boss because the trade union is weak, then you will find whoever, the refugees, a weak woman, whoever, gays, because you feel the anger. And you have to kind of let it out somehow.
Yes, but
or you can drink.
Yes,
that's a common approach as well.
But you know the how do you call them? In German we will call them Facharbeiter. So workers who do not do easy tasks but more sophisticated tasks, which are very important in Austria, because Austria is still a very industrialized country. More than 20% of the GDP comes from industry, and we have many workers in machinery, car production, chemical industry, skilled workers, and the skilled workers, they are gaining a lot of money. That's unbelievable. So they have seen a substantial rise in their incomes, and nevertheless, this is the group with the strongest sympathy for right-wing populism of all societal groups.
Wow. They feel threatened. No, I think that's the explanation, that they are threatened to lose the status that they achieved in the last couple of years. That's usually how sociologists explain this irony.
And then you have the problem when the climate movement says, okay, maybe your car is too big, or maybe we could also use a train, or maybe we should stop flying to, I don't know, to Vietnam for holiday. Then you have exactly this, this post-material discussions within society that are totally destroying the old patterns of solidarity. So it doesn't. I think your explanation is valid, but you have many other explanations, and all in all, it's a very, very complex phenomenon.
So just my comment on the difficulty for many of the social democratic parties is that they've got a strong opposition to the right-wing conservatives when they're not in power, but when they're in power, frequently their vision is to manage capitalism better. And unfortunately, with the growth of billionaire press ownership and international corporations, they find themselves trying to manage a decline in public spending and a decline, constraints on their ability. And consequently, in Britain right now, you've got a left-wing government, got an overwhelming majority. They are hugely unpopular. And because what they say is there is no alternative to austerity and more cuts. So having opposed it for 10 years of Conservatives, they're now imposing even more cuts under a Labour government. And as a result, every projection is showing a swing, not just to the Conservatives, but to a new group called Reform, which is led by a Trump fan and ultra anti-immigrant right-winger called Reform. They're looking like they're going to win. And I think this is a consistent pattern for social democratic parties, that either they've got a clear idea of how they manage the economy that doesn't include managing capitalism, managing the decline, and running it for the corporations, or they're inevitably going to face the backlash when they actually get into power and try to manage those cuts. And therefore grabbing hold of the, getting elected, but then imposing conservative cuts, it's unsurprising then that there's a huge shift to nationalism, where people get to blame, as you point out, look for scapegoats, and in the absence of anything else, and with the billionaire press also agreeing that it's all the immigrants and the gays and the transvestites problem. This is a massive problem for the left across Europe.
I understand this analysis, especially when we look at countries like the United Kingdom, but you cannot compare Austria with the United Kingdom.
Okay.
We have a totally different.
I'm ignorant really of Austrian politics.
No, I mean, the countries are so different, but we have, for example, a totally different income distribution. We have still an industrial base. We have in Vienna, for example, public housing is responsible for, let's say, the private sector in the renting market is only 40% in Vienna. 40. 30%.
That's very low. Yeah, it's very low.
And another 30% is Genossenschaften. So help me, Michael. Corporations. Huh? We
cooperatives.
Have cooperatives.
Yeah.
Of course, cooperatives. So we have still pretty well working public health system. It's getting worse, but it's still strong. We have a totally public pension system, which is not only marginally connected to financial markets. And the pensions are double as high as in Germany. Our collective bargaining covers 95% of all working contracts.
Wow.
Okay.
Nice.
So Austria is one of the strongest. So after the Scandinavians, or maybe together with the Scandinavians, we're one of the most elaborated welfare states in the world.
And a high standard of living that is being maintained. Really, I understand Vienna is considered one of the nicest cities to work in.
Totally, yeah. So it always wins the rankings. But even in the countries, we don't have a poor city. So the German discussion or the British discussion, where you can hear from the sound of a city if it's poor or rich. We don't have it, because you may know Salzburg or Innsbruck, which has a nice sound, but also former industrial cities like Linz or Wels have totally incomes totally over average. So we don't even have this strong regional
Nikki, I will jump in because there is something I wanted to discuss with you, because what you are describing is nice and peachy, but the truth is that for whatever reason, and that's the question, Austria in wealth, not in incomes, but in wealth, is much more unequal than UK is or Slovakia. So
really,
yeah, that's the irony. That's something I don't understand. How is it possible that even though you have all these kind of nice things, on data looks different? No, that's a question, please.
Yeah, that's the welfare state. First of all, public housing makes a big difference because you have much more private housing in the UK or in or in Sweden or in other countries with less public housing. So public housing is one of the differences. And the second difference is the public pension system. Because in the UK, all your savings are part of your wealth. Even your financial market-based pension saving. And in Austria, this public saving is not considered as private wealth. So the
data is skewed. That's what you are saying. On paper, it looks unequal, but in reality, Austria is more equal wealth-wise than Slovakia or than UK.
I don't know, because I haven't seen somebody trying to disaggregate this data in this way. But I tell you what, two major assets of average people are their private apartment first, and second, the private pension, the private pension savings, and both play a much less important role in Austria. So this is also something that has to be put into consideration.
No, totally. No, that's good point. And when we take all of Austria together, because you were talking about Vienna and 60% of the public housing, how is the all Austrian situation? Because Vienna is big, but it's only like 30% of all of the populace. So it spreads. I guess it's not as public in other countries or other cities as in Vienna, but it's like 50% of the housing or 40% of the housing is in public hands in Austria. What is the number?
No,
if you know.
No, because in the countryside you have a lot of private house
obviously, but the cities,
so I mean, that makes a big difference. But in Western Austria, in Salzburg, Innsbruck, you have much bigger problems with private renting and prices. So that's one of the reasons why the communists were strong in both cities. So in this very traditionally conservative areas, the communists had very good results in the city, and especially in Salzburg, where they got 20%. So one of the main reasons is because in the western Austrian cities, it's really expensive to afford a living due to housing. Also in Vienna, but Vienna is still not Munich. So compared to Munich, we're good. Compared to 2003, it's worse. Let's put it like this.
So what is the percentage of public housing in Salzburg? When it's 60% in Vienna, then it's like
much smaller. I don't know.
I mean, roughly like 10%, so that we have perspective when we compare it.
I can ask ChatGPT if you like.
Okay.
I don't know it. Huh?
When you're saying that communists won because of this, because many leftists in Slovakia, when I was having discussion with them, they were kind of astounded that communists are winning in Austria. That's like,
yeah.
What the heck? And that leads to a question: when the Communist Party in Austria isn't the Communist Party we used to have in Slovakia, I assume. So it's not like Stalinist communists, I guess that's the question. It's the proper communists, so what is it? Because, when you say Communist Party in Slovakia, then everyone is like, beware.
It's complicated.
No, that's why I'm asking this question, because we want to understand it.
Okay,
People will be curious. What's going on with communists in Austria? How the heck are they winning there?
So the Austrian Communist Party has lost importance in the 60s. Okay? And there's always been a very, very small party with maybe less than 1% in total share of total votes until the 2000s or something like this. And there were two wings, a traditional Stalinist wing and a Euro-communist modern wing within this small party. So, and the comeback of the communists was through the traditional Stalinist wing, because these people started in the 90s in the city of Graz, a very down-to-earth service policy regarding housing for the poor people in the city. And they were very successful, but it took a time. I think in 1998, the first time entered the council, Gemeinderat, it's called council or something like this. So Council of Graz. And then in the 2000s, they managed to get 20% in Graz. Always with one single issue, and this was housing. And they always gave some of their money into a housing fund of their private earnings, from politicians, what they got as politicians, to finance, for example, a washing machine for somebody poor. And yeah, they were very successful with this kind of policy. And then younger people without any Stalinist past stepped into the party and expanded this concept from Graz to Salzburg. So, for example, the guy in Salzburg, he's in my age, more or less, a little bit younger. He's too young to be called a Stalinist, but he has got a past in the Green Youth, in the youth of the Green Party. Okay, and then went to the communists. So the communists are lucky that they only care about communists and their allies, that they only care about housing, more or less, because in a moment where they would have to discuss about Ukraine, they would maybe have a terrible fight. But there is no need to talk about Ukraine, so they avoid to do it. But in the end, you have, old left, socialized in 70s and 80s, together with new left, socialized in the 2000s and 2010s in this in these communist parties and their allies.
And they are gaining momentum. No, they were successful now in Vienna. I think they had like 3 or 4 points. They gained a couple of percentage points from what I've seen.
Now they have 4. So that's still not enough to.
No, they are small, but it's not the insignificance of 1% that you were describing from the past. So
no, that's. I mean, on a national level, it's still very insignificant, but. In some regional elections, especially in Styria and in some cities, there's progress, but I wouldn't call it momentum. It's steady growth.
Mm-hmm.
Let's call it like this.
I had another big question I wanted to ask you, and then Tim can discuss these articles that he's interested in, because from the data I've seen around Europe, for reasons I don't understand, and that's the question, Austria is kind of like the only country that was able to kind of maintain, even though it declined, maintain the membership base of the political parties. When you look at the percentage of people who are politically active, who are members of a political party, Austria is total outlier. You, from the data I know, you are dancing around 16%, 16. So 16% of the electorate is member of a political party. All the other countries in Europe are way, way, way below you. Slovakia is at 2%. Yeah, so you are 800% better than we are. And the question is, how the heck did you manage something that everyone else kind of lost? Because when you look at Great Britain as an example, Tim knows the data, it declined. When you look at France, when you look at Germany, everywhere in the big countries, you can see decline. And okay, it declined in Austria, but not as dramatically. And if you know, no, that's the question, because
I have other data on my mind. So it was always very high, or much higher than other countries, but there is also a massive decline. You know, the Social Democratic. So when I was born,
and sorry to interrupt. The other question, and then I let you speak, is for reasons I don't understand. SPO lost membership, but ÖVP, the right-wing party, didn't. So from the data I know, and that's the question, that ÖVP used to have 500,000 members, and they still are dancing around that number, and SPO as well. And then it declined to this 140,000. If it's true, I don't know. That's the question.
I don't know.
Okay.
I you know, the Conservative Party, that's difficult because they have, that's very special. They have 3 subdivisions, one for the farmers, one for economy, and one for workers. And if you're part of the subdivision, they consider you as party member. But I think in a serious official statistic, you wouldn't be considered as party member then. And so maybe they got confused.
So they don't pay membership fees, and they are appearing as a party member, something like that?
They pay membership fee to it's called economic.
Okay, so it's not really political membership; it's something else.
Exactly.
And okay,
and so
got it.
It's for the Conservative, it's difficult, but for the Social Democrats, it's easy. You're a member or not. And when I was born in 1982, there were 7 million people in Austria, and 700,000 party members of the Social Democratic Party.
Wow.
So
pretty high.
The Social Democratic Party of Austria was, I think, Austria was regarding this system, it was between East and West. Was really, really crazy. Now we have.
Nico, what are the reasons? Why the heck were the Austrians so engaged in politics and in everything as compared with other Western European countries? I don't understand it. That's the question. And you are our neighbors, so you can inspire us to kind of do a better job, because obviously it's possible. You are our neighbors.
But we shouldn't romanticize it. Yeah? There's a lot of patronage.
Nico, I'm not throwing roses at you. I think that's what the numbers are saying. And it's impressive.
The question sounds like it's a cultural thing or an education thing. I'm not quite so sure it is. I think that something successful pulls in people being attracted by it. If it wasn't successful, it wouldn't be so big.
I mean, the main success is the Red Vienna of the 20s. I don't know if you've heard about it, but when you go through Vienna, you will see that the most beautiful and largest buildings of public housing are from the 1920s and early 1930s. Karl Marx-Hof, Friedrich Engels-Platz, and all this.
And these were at the time largely, I mean, socialist endeavors. I mean, there were initiatives from the socialists at the time, and they're happy to call themselves socialists. And hence, the
totally
Karl Marx, Karl Marx's name, Rosa Luxemburg, and all the rest of it, and the influence of those ideas on the ideas at the time. Now they backtracked on that ideology significantly since then, and of course we're right to reject the old communist parties and the growth of Stalinism. But at the time, that those unashamed socialist ideas gave rise to something that got a lot of public support.
It did. And on the other hand, you had historically a very strong Catholic base in the countryside and a very strong church. So we are, you must always think we are not Northern Europeans regarding religion. Regarding religion, we're Southerners. Yeah? We are Catholic. And Protestants don't play a role in Austria. So, like, you know, all the Southern European countries had strong communist parties. And we had the most, we had the most left-wing social democratic. So this is, and we had the same cultural fight between socialists and Catholics, like in Don Camillo and Pepone. If you know the movie from the 50s in Italy between communists and Catholics. So all this cultural fight was always very, very strong, and therefore.
But it's ironic that I grew up a Catholic myself, and yet most of the trade unions were all ex-Catholics. So most of the trade union reps were all ex-Catholics.
Yeah,
or still Catholics, or still calling themselves Catholics, you know, like, but nevertheless, the Catholics dominated pretty much lots of the left wing in the union movement.
We have a very strong Catholic labor movement in Austria. It's not as strong as it was 40 years ago, but we still have it. So yeah, and there are more historical reasons, but always, Michael, you know that once more than 100 years ago we were one country, the Habsburg monarchy. And Vienna was the capital of the Habsburg monarchy. With in 1900, Vienna was the fourth largest city in the world. So then the empire collapsed, and then you have this 2 million city in a 6 million country, a total cosmopolitan city with 200,000 Jews, avant-garde artists, everything, in a small alpine country with very conservative rural population and Catholic, and so from this cultural fight and tension comes all the Austrian political tradition of the 20th century.
And a huge.
So you were lucky, unlucky, sort of, yeah, that it disintegrated. That's how you kept your momentum, the leftists in Austria, because it kind of. That's what I'm reading from what you're saying, yeah? You kind of kept the capital, and because of the disintegration of the Habsburg monarchy, it was as big as it was. So it was like a hub of progressivism in that sea of, well, I wouldn't call it, you know, whatever, Catholicism or what. And that's how you managed. That's the explanation. That, you know, that's how it kept alive.
It has a history to its growth, is what he's saying. You know, it's the history of the movement starts back in the 20s, and its success has a resonance through the decades. So it didn't come from nowhere. It doesn't just spring from the culture of Austrians. It has a history that.
It has a history.
Result, you know.
And you asked me why we have so many party members. And the reason is the polarization of these two movements, the Catholic and the socialist one. We had a civil war. In 1934, we had a civil war, like in Spain. Just it was the Spanish Civil War 3 years. Ours was 3 days. But there was a civil war, and there was a Catholic fascist regime 4 years before Hitler came.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I knew about Hitler coming in. I didn't know that there was a civil war, but I did know that there was a phrase on the left, you know, rather Vienna than Berlin or something. And it was the capitulation of Berlin and the left-wing groups there, compared to the fight and the literal civil war battle in Vienna when they tried to impose, you know, when they tried to exterminate and dismantle much of the left-wing groups, they fought bitterly to retain it.
That was in 1934, and
Okay.
so Berlin fell to the Nazis, and Vienna fell to the, conservative Austrian fascism, closer to Mussolini and Franco. Yeah?
But they fought bitterly, didn't they? It didn't just last. It wasn't overnight. It was a.
There were fights. Yeah,
yeah,
but
in the end, the army came in. Yeah.
The army came in, and the party leaders decided not to fight.
Okay, I'd like to ask you about your article about this left-right and free trade and stuff like that, because there's a lot of excitement right now or rejection of American as they try to turn free trade on its head and introduce protectionism there in the States. And I just wondered what your thoughts are, as whether there's lessons from history here, as the British Empire was all in favor of free trade when its empire's dominant in the 1830s, and then introduced protectionism pretty much at the decline of the British Empire in the 1930s. And many of the European states, in fact, then switched to protectionism or used their markets or their colonial states and introduced protectionism as a result. And of course that then, worryingly for today, results in the antagonism between different states. So on the one hand, I agree with you in your assessment that the left is traditionally opposed to some of the World Trade Organization attempts to introduce more free market conditions for good reason. They were going to introduce worse food regulations, for instance, or if they'd introduce Monsanto, what was it there? The global international
Monsanto, you mean, no?
Yeah, Monsanto. Yeah. What they were doing, genetically modified food would have become the norm in Europe, and many of the European states were rightly resistant of this idea that they had to open up their markets to this this modified food. But I think in your article you pointed out, well, this opened the door to them being sued by those corporations themselves for not allowing these corporations in, or many other regulators like pharmaceutical industry or others would have then had lawsuits in the European Union courts because they were not in following free trade agreements. In the end, the whole thing collapsed, and there wasn't a trade agreement between the US and the EU. And I would have been one that was firmly against those free trade agreements. Today, it's Trump that's now turning them on their head and saying he doesn't want free trade, he wants tariffs, he wants protectionism, he wants America first. And there's shock horror about it, but I think it's a mistake for the left to think we're all in favor of free trade. Actually, free trade comes with largely with support for big corporations are the ones that were posed to benefit the most. But I think it's indicative of American a decline of their empire, if you like, that they are losing the international trade battle, if you like, the competition between one country and another. China's increasing, not America. So they then, with their military might, can introduce protectionism, and initially it may even benefit America in the short term, but long term, it gives rise to this antagonism between one state and another. And I think it's quite a worrying development that what America's about to do may benefit American workers temporarily, but long term, it increases antagonism internationally.
So do
you think there's any parallels between the decline of the British Empire and their switch to protectionism in the 1930s and America's introduction of protectionism now?
good question. I think the difference is that British Empire, I mean, they lost their industrial advantage already in the late 19th century regarding Germany, for example. The period when the UK was the industrial powerhouse of the world and the largest exporter, that was before World War One, or even earlier. And in this period, I think that exporting the most productive goods was a sign for a very productive, high-skilled industry, and for a lot of for wealth, for economic wealth. It was a proxy for economic wealth. Trading industrial goods was a proxy for economic wealth. Now is the question, is trading industrial goods in our world a proxy for economic wealth? And liberals would say, no, it isn't, because the Americans, they don't need to do this simple fabrication stuff that can be made in China and Vietnam. What they need is Silicon Valley. What they need is Wall Street. What they need is high-skilled service sector. They need the tech labs and not the fabrication. This is the liberal view on the division of labor. So they say the Americans are crazy to try to get back their traditional manufacturing, because obviously the American GDP per capita is higher than all European countries, I think, except Norway, and therefore it would be crazy to stop the division of labor. It's better to have a high productive service sector and let the others make, I don't know, cars or whatever, or car components. And yeah.
I think just one comment on that. There's this nonsense that somehow the Chinese or the Asian economies stole American jobs, whereas it's actually those corporations themselves that shifted production to Asia, to China, to wherever they could get the labor cheapest. It wasn't the Asian companies somehow stepping in and stealing American jobs. It's the corporations themselves that moved the jobs abroad for those very reasons that you're pointing out, because it was so much cheaper.
Historically, of course, it's true. Huh? But this is the traditional liberal view from the Obama period, from the Clinton period, and today many defenders of a global liberal order would argue like this. And now we have, on the other hand, I mean, Trump is too stupid and too, he's power obsessive, and whatever he does, his motive, we don't know why he does something. But when we look, so for example, J.D. Vance or Oren Cass, I don't know if you've heard about him, or other thinkers of the new right, they would argue, no, the industrial base is absolutely important for economic wealth. It's important for having a broad middle class, because these are medium skilled and medium paid jobs, so to make the American family, to make the average American family again wealthy, we need these jobs in the US to be globally more independent. We need these jobs in the US, and our trade deficit is a symbol for having lost all this industrial base. So these are two totally different point of views regarding this industry-based economic model. And I think both are purely both are wrong. But I tend a little bit more to the to the J.D. Vance camp than to the liberal camp, because I think that the industrial base is connected to the tech labs. I think you have learning by doing in the fabrication process, in the manufacturing progress. So you cannot have only research and development and artificial intelligence without getting the the feedback from the production process. So if you want to have a high productive industrial base or high productive economy, I think you should have both. And therefore, I think that the European way, not the British, but the German, Austrian, Swiss, Swedish, Scandinavian, North Italian way of industrial policy and industrial tradition is smart. So gaining abroad, remaining a broad industrial base, but also put a lot of effort on research development and high productive services. But this is a very so now you ask me as an economist. So it goes very deep into economics.